There is Myokonin, Saichi that I mentioned elsewhere, but I have more chance to review what I've written more than 10 years ago and also listen to some of the videos on YouTube. The funny thing or unfortunate thing is that the number of people who are watching, the view count is very small, but I believe there's an essence of, if you want to call it, the core of religion, not just the Buddhism or Shin Buddhism, but related to Zen and all other religions at the core. And the point I thought I may want to capture here is about the moment of death. In Japanese, it's called Rinju, end of facing the end is the term translated into English. And he talks about the Rinju is every moment, in fact, whenever he notices it. And the meaning of that Rinju has a lot to connect to what I have been talking about, the two universes. The one is the universe in the mind, and the other is the universe from the core of our being, the laws of universe manifesting for us to be alive, or for us to die, in fact, because that's what it is. That's what's going on in nature and everywhere, because it's the law of nature. In Buddhism, they may call it as inochi, the life itself, the core of our being. So, if we look at those two universes and see the gap in between, you can understand, even logically, that if you look at the situation from the mind, there's a limitation. Mind divide things, good at bad, beautiful, ugly, like that. And you develop a boundary to distinguish one from the other. So it's the mind nature to make a decision, make a judgment for the convenience of the person who uses the mind. But the limitation is that if we face the fact, the reality of what's happening, if you look at the apple, for example, how do you divide up with the mind to talk about what that apple is in reality? You can't. So when we look at the law of the universe, you cannot dissect, and even if you could, it is only showing an aspect of the law of the universe. But the reality of how things are manifesting cannot be understood by the mind. So when Saichi, back to the Myokonin, which is known as the person who has the peculiar view of the world in the Shin Buddhism by Shinran, who is the originator, and it emphasized the point that the jiriki, which is the self-power, cannot reach out to the other power, which is the source of our universe, the law of the universe. So that is also pointing the limitation of the mind. And the foundation of the religion or spiritual pursuit, if you call that, is to go beyond the limitation of the mind. And that is Rinju, death of the mind, if you want to call that. It's not just the death, biological death of your being, as commonly understood as what the death means, or the Rinju may mean in Japanese too. But the Saichi's view, and I fundamentally agree to all what he says, is that the Rinju, the death of mind, or death of the way we use the mind to distinguish one to the other, dualistic view, to make a judgment. It has its own value, but when it comes to life itself, life and death itself, you cannot reach out. Because to understand, again, the law of the universe, you cannot dissect what is happening. So the reality about life is that it is as it is, and the death is as it is, so that nothing, or I would say everything, is manifestation of the law of the universe. And if you connect to that, understand that, not in the mind, but your being is with that law of the universe. When your mind is empty, as if you bridge the gap to go the other shore, to experience the other power, Tariki, manifesting, then everything is as it is. And that's the point of Rinju, death of mind, if you want to call that. So, if we don't understand the point, because we are using the mind to understand, using this dissecting, fumbetsuchi in Japanese, the mind to distinguish one to the other, or you can call it your self. Self is distinguishing you to the other. And that's natural in mind, because that's how the mind functions. But to go beyond the mind, you cannot play with this ego, so that that's the point of no self, discovery of nothingness, where everything is manifesting. Therefore, from the mind point of view, there's the barrier, but that is a self-power. Whatever you use your mind, there's limitation, that's the boundary, you cannot go beyond. But from the other side, which is the other power, manifesting that law of the universe as it is, everything in nature. Nature in Japanese is shizen, meaning she is by itself, zen is as it is. So life and death as it is, there's no barrier, it's just a fact. And therefore, from the point of view of other power, there is no barrier. Everything is a manifestation of that law of the universe. So, if I reflect my case, I had the awakening experience, and then to chase why it happened and how, and that chasing itself is self-power, using the mind. So I could go bridge the gap or go through the barrier every now and then, but you go back, as soon as I go back to the using of my mind, then you have the limitation coming back. So there's no end to the use of the mind to go beyond, to get to the core of our being. So that's the point of the meditation, or any other ways that I share, such as just focusing on breathing or inner body sensation, so that the state of no mind would help me not create the barrier, so that I sense this transparency within, and resonating sense that I'm connected to the law of the universe. And to me, that's awareness or awakening, even, that I can have But still, you go back to the mind world to look at the problems of my life or the world, or the problems related to from the climate change to the war, and the technology, the impact, social media, and the confusion in the world, or even in Congress. There are lots of those that we have, so that I see that and feel pain about it. What can be done? But then that's just the manifestation of what it is, and I may find the wisdom to go over by spending 3 days, 4 days thinking or not thinking to digest what can be done, and the wisdom may pop up. So that has been the case that I've been sharing in the YouTube and so forth. But here again, that self-power, mind-based way of figuring out, to come up with a wisdom, has no limit. There's no limit, of course, because everything is impermanent and things change, and I need to, or the society may wish to find the path forward so that it's natural for us to use a mind. But here again, we can also realize when there's no use of it because of certain limitation, then you can also have that rinju, death of mind, so to speak, or no mind. In the way Shin talks about is that self-power has limitations, so let the other power to take over, because that's how the Shin Buddhism or Saichi's understanding or digestion of the idea of rinju is: you let go yourself, your mind, and let the other power to take over. Then, as if the filter is gone in your eyes, you open up that sense, which is, to me, very, if not identical, very close to the sense of transparency, vibration spreading out, aliveness, inner body sensation, and clarity. That given what we got, it is okay. So that's the sense of the rinju, death of mind, so to speak, not in the physical death. So Saichi was pointing in his poem, the short phrases he left in many, many books, as a person which he didn't want to share with anyone because that was his own appreciation of the fact that he has already passed the rinju, death of mind, but he can repeat to look at the rinju every time that he used the mind and go over. So there's a acknowledgement and realization and the connection to, he even called Oyasama, which is Mr. or Mrs. Parent. And the parent in this case means Amida Buddha, who said that he would help those with burden, that you can go to the other power by saying Namu Amida Butsu. So it's very relating to the setting of how each individual may go through it, and I may want to talk more about it because it's more related to, in my view, not the intellectual part of us, but more connected to the emotional sense of even sense of sin that each person cannot overcome the burden as a human by using the mind, and therefore by letting go of that self-power, there's a realization of the other power, or that law of the universe, to prevail, and it is prevailing already every moment, but there's that connection between self and the other. No boundaries, because you're not looking from the mind point of view of the world and toward the other power, but the other power, or the law of the universe, or the way of the universe, is identified as who you really are, beyond the narrow-mindedness of self. There's no self, so you get to the same point of Zen, as much as I may have mentioned about Dogen, talking about let you go throw away yourself into the house of Buddha, the room of Buddha, and let that things to take care from that end. So those two religions, if you call that, but I believe this is a very fundamental thing that applies to all the religions, religion being the essential way of teaching, essential teaching of life, that whatever that we can dig into the field of this space beyond the mind, you call the spiritual space, then you get to the same sense that you have the opening by letting yourself go and let the other power to take over. And in one word, that's Namu Amida Butsu, meaning you let go of yourself for the power of Amida Buddha, other power. So, at the end, it is each individual's pursuit, if you want to call it, but in fact it's not you to pursue, because you are not there to pursue, but the other power to prevail its work when we let go of ourselves. That's the awakening and enlightenment. That is the connection to Zen. But I think Zen has more of an intellectual element compared to Shin, the teaching of Shinran, and connected to Amida Buddha, being more emotionally, which means to me is not the superficial part of the brain, but rather more emotional, fundamental, closer to the source of our being, that we have that sense, as if that Oyasama, the Mr. or Mrs. Parent, Amida Buddha, is there with you from the beginningless beginning to the endless end, because that represents the law of nature, the law of universe, the other power. That's the essential power prevailing everywhere that we can recognize. And that's the saying and experience of Saichi. Not much educational background, very little, but perhaps that may have helped him not to be confused or confined in the mind space, but more connected to his being, the emotional sense of what is required. He felt the need to overcome, and he found that in Amida Buddha power, the natural power that exists everywhere, that he can find. Thank you.